I hope that you know that fountain pen ink can be every bit as exciting as the pens.
But Drew, there are so many more variations between pens. With ink, you just have different colors.
False.
False.
Yes, there are a ton of colors, and different brands have different flow behaviors, but there are also a bunch of really cool ink features. Inks that shimmer, inks that sheen, shade, waterproof inks, fast dry inks, scented inks, and even inks that keep your pen from drying out. You and I are going to begin our inky journey today by talking briefly about the 3 most common ink features: shading, shimmer, and sheen. Fountain pen ink is water-based, often using dye to give it its color. Shading occurs when ink is distributed on the page in such a way that it pools in darker spots when the pen is lifted from the page. You'll see this happening with lighter colors, colors that are less saturated with dye. As with all of the features I'm going to be talking about today, some folks don't prefer to see shading. When I have an ink that shades well, I like to write in print, since that kind of naturally prompts you to lift your pen more often and thus gives you more pooling at a lot of different points. I'll also just lift my pen more often when I'm writing in cursive, and I usually choose a broader nib or a stub nib because the more ink you put down, the more shading you will see. 2 of my favorite shading inks are Robert Oster Cafe Crema and Diamine Marine. Less absorbent paper is the key to getting shading to show up, so keep that in mind. Shimmer ink is fountain pen ink with glitter. Most likely natural or synthetic mica powder. There are several brands that have inks like this. Shimmer ink became popularized back when Jacques Herbin's 1670 line of inks kind of came onto the scene, and since then it's been increasing in popularity each year. Jacques Herbin now has their 1670 line with gold colors, gold shimmer in their inks, and then a 1798 collection with silver shimmer. Additionally though, Diamine has dozens of shimmer inks now. Robert Oster has a shimmer line, Private Reserve has a shimmer line, and just recently even Sailor joined the party with shimmer inks. It's been nuts. Ferris Wheel Press also jumped in with both feet, regularly releasing like wild shimmering colors within their Fairy Tales collection. Like they do that all year long. Also notable is the brand Wearing Goal. Not only do they produce shimmer inks, but they also sell glitter potions. Yes, you can shimmerify any ink you want. Just a couple of drops into a sample vial and boom, your favorite ink now has even more of a dazzling personality. Now, I will say that these shimmer particles do settle to the bottom of your bottle, to the bottom of your sample vial, and yes, to the bottom of your pen, or the side if it's laying on the side. So treat it like pulpy orange juice and turn it over a few times before you start enjoying it. Even still, the shimmer bits may eventually require a bit more focused cleaning efforts than standard ink. Try Jacques Herbin Emerald of Chivor if you want a bit of shimmer, and then go for Colorverse Witch by Starlight if you want to go nuts. There's no shortage of this variety of ink for sure. And for more shimmer show off, you can check this video that we did. Sheen generally occurs when an actor doesn't think Estevez sounds Hollywood enough. Sheen generally occurs in heavily saturated inks where the excess dye creates a layer on the surface of the paper. So, remember how shading happens with less saturated inks? Well, sheen is the other end of the spectrum. There's so much dye in here that the paper just can't absorb it all, so it creates this kind of oil slick-esque shine that stays suspended right there on the surface. It's a really fun effect that isn't quite as common as shimmer, but like shimmer, it seems to be ever increasing in popularity. If you want to try an ink with a hint of sheen, Pilot Iroshizuku Yamabudo will put down a gorgeous magenta with a hint of yellow sheen, kind of a gold sheen, depending on what type of paper. Like shading, you'll see more sheen if you have paper that is less absorbent. Ferris Wheel Press's Fairy Tales inks, the little bottles, often have shimmer and sheen, so you can consider some of those as well. But if you want a frightening amount of sheen, Organic Studio Nitrogen has remained our top-selling ink year after year, despite the fact that it's notorious for creating flow difficulties. It is the sultan of sheen. and it remains available to you if you want. Water resistance is a utilitarian and pretty specific ink feature. Sometimes you might want waterproof ink to just ensure longevity and performance, but a lot of the time it's used for its ability to withstand being used for a base that gets written on or brushed over. Ink that is water resistant is great for watercolor. When you're layering your colors and you don't want anything to smear or bleed. It's also great for stamping, for creating journal templates that you're going to be writing over top of, and for a bunch of fun and creative applications. To achieve this, it's common for ink here to swap out dye for pigment. I guess oversimplification would be to describe dye as mixing liquid food coloring with water, and pigment is like mixing water with flour. The flour stays in liquid suspension, but it's still very solid, tiny particles that never actually dissolve. Pigment's kind of like that. It stays in suspension longer than flour, so maybe that's not a great example, but you get what I'm saying. It's solid. A few brands do have great inks that are impressively water resistant. I actually did a very casual test on this, if you want to check this video here. But by and far, the largest assortment of waterproof inks are going to be the Document series by Diatramentis. The Document inks are legitimately waterproof, and that's important to note, proof. There's a lot of different inks that claim water resistance, which is usually true to some extent. They will resist water, but that could mean that they are going to look the same when they come in contact with water, or it could mean that one component of the ink will remain intact after contact with water. When an ink is waterproof, that means water has little to no effect on it at all. And while it's common to see permanent blacks, the Document series here by Diatramentis has dozens of colors, so it's a great place to dial into if you're looking for waterproof ink. If you're a lefty, then fast dry fountain pen inks might pique your interest. These are inks that absorb quickly into most varieties of paper in less than a minute. That's what I think anyway. Fast dry means less than a minute. Depending on the color, you could see some inks dry 10 to 15 seconds and others take, maybe around 30 to 40 seconds. It'll depend heavily on the paper that you're using and how much ink you're putting down. But if you're looking for a series of inks to start looking at here, I'll point you to Private Reserve's Fast Dry collection. This is our only collection of inks that is manufactured with dry time as a goal, so it's kind of the most obvious place to begin. Although I will say that with the hundreds and hundreds of fountain pen inks available, there are plenty of inks that aren't necessarily labeled fast dry, but they still dry within seconds, often, faster than official fast dry inks. It depends heavily on paper. Our team does frequently test for dry time on new and popular ink colors. So if you're on our website, check the images on those product pages to see if the ink that you're interested in has a test added there. It'll be an image. Also, one thing to note is that the inks that dry fast are going to absorb super fast, right? And sometimes as a result of that, you'll see feathering on your paper. So finding an ink that'll dry quickly, but not too quickly, might require some trial and error, but ink samples are a great way to do that. And like I said before, Private Reserve Fast Dry is a solid starting point. Dual shading, chroma shading, multitonal, this is a super cool effect. And it's similar to shading, it kind of is shading, where you get a more saturated version of the color in those areas where ink pools. But here, the pooling areas dry as kind of a different color entirely. It's subtle, but incredibly cool. Again, this is a form of shading, so the effect is limited to less saturated colors, for now anyway. But the result is fun, and unlike Shimmer and Sheen, you don't need to commit any additional cleaning efforts in order to achieve these results. This feature was popularized by Sailor, and they've still gone on to have the best go-to dual shading inks, in my opinion. By far, the most well-known are Sailor, Manyo, Haha, and Neko Yanagi. Both of these are similar. What they deliver is a kind of a hazy purple gray with shades of blue and a tiny little halo of green. They're beautiful, they're just incredible. While Sailor does have a few more in this color range, I'll also mention to you Sailor Ink Studio 173. Like most dual shaders, it's a lighter color that'll show off more if you use a big nib size, but what you'll get on your paper here is a peach orange pink that I just fell in love with. It's such a unique blend of colors, and definitely worth a try. With a less absorbent paper like Tomoe River, dual shading can look genuinely captivating. I have a full video on this type of ink here if you're curious. One of my favorite features on this list are the Infinity Inks by Private Reserve. First of all, the Private Reserve Infinity Inks are the only inks manufactured specifically for keeping your pen ready to write even after extended periods of having your cap off. Secondly, they actually work. When I first got my hands on them, I chose to ink up a pen that I rarely use because it has a bad habit of drying out quickly. For my entire 8-hour workday, I never capped it. I wrote with a line or two every 30 minutes, and then each time I picked it up, it wrote right away. Being 100% honest, there were a couple times where it didn't write immediately, but after a couple of taps, it woke up just fine and was flowing like a champ. And keep in mind, this pen that I'm using in this case usually would dry out overnight with the cap on. So let alone with the cap off all day, it's been great. Since then, the Infinity Ink has been my go-to for ensuring that I can still enjoy all of my pens, even the ones that might not be the best performers, but ones that I love nonetheless. I think we all know somebody, or have a pen like that. A few things to consider though. As they're made to not dry out in your pen, you'll probably find that these might take some additional time to dry on your page as well. So smaller nib sizes might be a good choice here. Still, in my opinion, the value of resurrecting a forsaken yet appreciated fountain pen is well worth it. And finally, I will just say that scented ink exists. As of now, scented inks are available in 2 brands, Diatramentis and Diamine. The Diamine scents tend to last a little bit longer than the Diatramentis ones, in my experience, and the scents themselves will be 100% subjective, so I'm not gonna weigh in on my opinion on that. Just, I'll recommend you try samples before committing to a full bottle. I know that was a lot, but I hope that hearing a bit about some fun ink features was interesting. The best part is that while, yeah, this is a lot, each of these types of ink are easily searchable on our site. Simply go to gouletpens.com, go to inks, go to shop by property, and it's all there. So thank you so much for spending some time with me today. Have fun and write on.